This is CNN Breaking News.
I'm Wolf Blitzer in Washington, and we want to welcome our viewers in the United States and around the world. We're following the growing crisis in Ukraine, where tensions are rapidly escalating, and the President of the United States, President Obama, is about to walk into the White House briefing room to make a major statement. The Ukrainian government is accusing Russian Black Sea forces of trying to seize two airports in Crimea and cutting off communications between the Russian majority region and the rest of Ukraine. Russian troops also are said to have surrounded the state television facility. Some are calling it, and I'm quoting now, an armed invasion of the country. All this coming just 6 days after the Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych was driven from the capital following deadly demonstrations against his pro-Moscow government. As we wait for the president to walk into the briefing room, let's go to our senior White House correspondent, Jim Acosta. Jim, set the scene for us.
Well, this was a hastily called statement by the White House for President Obama. We do expect him to be out here in a few moments. He was supposed to be out here 15 minutes ago, so he is running a bit late. And he was expected to be over at the Democratic National Committee at this hour, Wolf, laying out his midterm strategy for his party. But instead, he'll be here in the White House, in the briefing room, talking about Ukraine. We've been pressing White House officials all day long as to what is going on the ground in Crimea, just who those forces are with the blacked over or concealed insignias on their uniforms. Are those Russian forces? And while there are some indications that they may indeed be Russian forces, it'll be interesting to hear what the president has to say about that. And Wolf, you know, we've been hearing all day long from White House officials all the way over to Secretary of State John Kerry that the United States has been warning Russia that it would be a grave mistake to intervene militarily in Ukraine. And if that is indeed what has happened here, then this is going to be a test for the president. The president said just last week in Mexico that he doesn't view his relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin as an international chess match, but that appears to be what is happening. The pieces on the board are moving, Wolf, and it's going to be fascinating to find out what the president has to say in just a few moments. He is going to be using the power of his presidency, the force of the Oval Office, to warn Russia as to what their moves should or should not be. And at this point, you know, we've asked White House Press Secretary Jay Carney, you know, what are the U.S. options if Russia has indeed intervened militarily? Earlier today at the briefing here at the White House, Wolf, Jay Carney just did not have a good answer for that. At this point, they're just not going to speculate what the options are if Russia has, in the words of this White House, crossed a line and invaded, Wolf.
And as we wait for the president, I want to just play the remarks we just heard from the United States ambassador to the United Nations, Samantha Power. She had some very strong words.
The United States stands with the Ukrainian people in determining their own destiny, their own government, their own future. We are gravely disturbed by reports of Russian military deployments into the Crimea. The United States calls upon Russia to pull back the military forces that are being built up in the region, to stand down and to allow the Ukrainian people the opportunity to pursue their own government, create their own destiny, and to do so freely without intimidation or fear.
Samantha Power, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. It's not every day, late on a Friday afternoon, the President of the United States, unscheduled, makes a decision to go into the briefing room and make a statement on a situation around the world, this time the escalating tensions in Ukraine and the escalating tensions with Russia. Jim Sciutto, we're only seconds away from the President of the United States. This is a big deal.
No question it's a big deal. The U.S. now believes these are Russian troops. They are observing movements of these Russian troops on the ground. And this is what we spoke about a number of times. You don't need a full-scale Georgia-style invasion for Russia to do military intervention in Ukraine. You could do the smaller special forces-led black ops, and that appears to be what we're seeing there. The other point I would just say, we've had a lot of communication between the U.S. and Russia at the most senior levels in the last 72 hours, the last week. The President to Putin, Kerry to Lavrov every day, including this morning. When American leaders got assurances from Russian leaders, they would not do something like this. And they repeatedly warned them not to make moves that could be misinterpreted as military intervention. And that appears to be what we're seeing happening right now, despite those assurances. I think, Wolf, you can say, we're looking at a relationship in peril here.
It has all the feelings, even though the president only a few days ago said it didn't have the feelings of another Cold War type of situation. It certainly reminds me, and I covered the Cold War, of what was going on then.
Absolutely. And just based on the conversations I've had the last few days, clearly higher anxiety today than there was yesterday, higher anxiety yesterday than there was the day before. They've been watching these movements, and really these are the kinds of scenarios they did not want to see happen. I'm not going to say nightmare scenarios because there are other further steps that Russia could have taken, but still, these are worrisome developments, no question. And you get that sense from the feeling and the comments you hear from U.S. officials.
Here comes the President of the United States.
Good afternoon, everybody. Over the last several days, the United States has been responding to events as they unfold in Ukraine. Now, throughout this crisis, we have been very clear about one fundamental principle. The Ukrainian people deserve the opportunity to determine their own future. Together with our European allies, we have urged an end to the violence and encouraged Ukrainians to pursue a course in which they stabilize their country, forge a broad-based government, and move to elections this spring. I also spoke several days ago with President Putin, and my administration has been in daily communication with Russian officials. And we've made clear that they can be part of an international community's effort to support the stability and success of a united Ukraine going forward, which is not only in the interest of the people of Ukraine and the international community, but also in Russia's interests. However, we are now deeply concerned by reports of military movements taken by the Russian Federation inside of Ukraine. Russia has a historic relationship with Ukraine, including cultural and economic ties, and a military facility in Crimea. But any violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity would be deeply destabilizing, which is not in the interest of Ukraine, Russia, or Europe. It would represent a profound interference in matters that must be determined by the Ukrainian people. It would be a clear violation of Russia's commitment to respect the independence and sovereignty and borders of Ukraine and of international laws. And just days after the world came to Russia for the Olympic Games, it would invite the condemnation of nations around the world. And indeed, the United States will stand with the international community in affirming that there will be costs for any military intervention in Ukraine. The events of the past several months remind us of how difficult democracy can be in a country with deep divisions. But the Ukrainian people have also reminded us that human beings have a universal right to determine their own future. Right now, the situation remains very fluid. Vice President Biden just spoke with the Prime Minister of Ukraine to assure him that in this difficult moment, the United States supports his government's efforts and stands for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and democratic future of Ukraine. I also commend the Ukrainian government's restraint and its commitment to uphold its international obligations. We will continue to coordinate closely with our European allies. We will continue to communicate directly with the Russian government, and we will continue to keep all of you in the press corps and the American people informed as events develop. Thanks very much.
Who those forces are in Crimea? Are they Russian?
So there he is, a short statement from the president, only 3 or 4 minutes, but a strong statement effectively warning Russia, don't intervene in the domestic matters of Ukraine, an independent country. There will be consequences, the president suggesting, if the Russians were to do so. The president saying the U.S. is deeply concerned. And he does confirm that Russian troops right now are inside Ukraine. He says the situation remains very fluid, but it's clearly a dangerous situation as we watch it unfold. We have our correspondent standing by here in Washington as well as in Ukraine and Moscow. Jim Sciutto is our chief national security correspondent. You heard those strong words from the president. As I said earlier, it's not every day. The end of a day, end of a week, late Friday afternoon, the president decides to change his schedule, go into the briefing room, and in effect, issue a strong warning to Moscow.
No question, from the highest level now. But when you look at the content of this warning, it's very similar to the warning that other officials, Secretary Kerry, Secretary Hagel, and others have been making over these past few days. We are deeply concerned by events on the ground. Any violation of Ukraine's sovereignty will be deeply destabilizing. But those warnings have already been made, but clearly not heeded by the Russian side, if we believe that events on the ground are proceeding as they appear to be proceeding. He also lays out his vision for Ukraine, stabilizing the country, a broad-based government with Russia playing a part. That's a plan that's been on the table for some time and clearly is not satisfying the Russian side. They want more. They don't want to play a part, clearly. They want leadership on this. So, I just have to wonder what effect that's going to have on the Russian side.
But it's one thing for the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of State or the Vice President, for that matter, to make a strong statement like that. It's another thing when the President of the United States does it himself. Barbara Starr is over at the Pentagon. So I guess the bottom line question, and it's a simple question. I don't know if the answer is simple, Barbara. Has Russia invaded Ukraine?
Well, that is the question. Has Putin made his move to take over Crimea? What I can tell you, Wolf, is the U.S. assessment at this point is that this arrival of Russian military forces, and that is what they are calling it, the U.S. assessment is it was an uncontested arrival. So that may not be an invasion. That may be a very sympathetic population in Crimea that was quite willing to support these Russian troops landing there. What this has done now, it's given Russia 3 legs on which to operate. Perhaps several hundred ground troops, perhaps as many as 2,000. The U.S. has no reason to doubt those claims. So they have ground troops, they have air transport, they came in by airplane, and they have the naval forces at Sevastopol with that naval infantry unit, essentially the same as U.S. Marines, providing the 3rd leg. The question will be, of course, where does Russia go from here? What do they do next? Right now, it looks like they have established their base of operations for Crimea. The U.S., I think the really important thing here is the U.S. assessment that Russian military forces have landed uncontested is very key. This is not a conflict in this area of Crimea with the Russian-supported population. So where this all goes now remains to be seen. How quickly will opposition to the Russian presence develop in Crimea? How long will the Russians stay? What will they do next? How and when or will they even leave? Wolf?
Let's go to Crimea, Barbara. Right now, Diana Magne is our reporter on the scene. So what's going on over there? Are these Russian troops being warmly welcomed by the Russian-speaking Ukrainians in Crimea, or is there some sort of resistance?
Hi, Wolf. Well, we have no confirmation that there are 2,000 troops who've arrived on Crimean soil. And in fact, the new regional administration here says that that is a rumor. We have, and I've been to the airport and the facilities where we have seen masked, armed gunmen surrounding these facilities, but they wear no military insignia. They do not respond when you ask them where they're from, whether they're Russian. They are highly organized, highly armed. It is difficult, therefore, to believe that they are anything other than Russian personnel. But, you know, I mean, we were talking to Jim Sciutto earlier. He said they look like they're special ops guys from Russia. To be honest, Wolf, they look very young. I've been looking at their faces from behind their balaclavas. They look very young. It is difficult, though, to believe that they are anything other than Russian military personnel or in the pay of the Russians because of their organization. They have been fairly peaceful, if a threatening presence. They haven't halted airport operations. They are now surrounding the main state broadcaster here in Crimea. The Director General of the state broadcaster told us that they were doing that for the broadcaster's protection. And remember, this is a very pro-Russian part of Ukraine. The majority here are ethnic Russian. And the message from the president that they support this Ukrainian government is not a message that will sit well with the majority of people in Crimea who do not feel that their interests are represented by the Maidan, by the new Ukrainian government, Wolf.
Stand by, Diana. I want to go to Kiev right now. Ian Lee is there. That's the capital of Ukraine. And I sense that there's a totally different attitude about these Russian troops in Crimea in Kiev as opposed to what we just heard from Diana Magne in Crimea. In Kiev, there's a different attitude than in Crimea, given the hostility, if you will, Ian, to what Russia's up to.
Oh, that's right, Wolf. As far as the officials here are concerned, they're saying that the Russians have gone in militarily to the Crimea to try to annex it. This is what we're hearing from officials here. And the acting president, Alexander Turchinov, has said that not only have they gone in, they're trying to take over civil administration buildings as well as communication buildings. They're saying this is, frankly, as an invasion. And the one thing that the President Obama said was he told the Russians that there would be cost for military intervention. Well, the Ukrainian government is saying that military intervention by the Russians is taking place right now. They've said that at least 11 military helicopters have come in, as well as roughly 10 airplanes flying into the area. This all coming from the government here.